All right, so the session is, I hope you all can see the screen, Unlocking the Secret to Effective Instruction in the Multi-Level Remote Hybrid Math Class. So this is about those of us who are still teaching math online as well as hybrid, because like we talked about yesterday in our session, in the opening session, that a lot of things that we were doing online that were effective, we should consider how we can take that back for those of us who are teaching in person. So I have a couple of objectives for us today. Actually, but first I want to get everybody on our Padlet. So I'm going to drop the link into the chat box. So if you want to access any and all of the resources for today, you definitely need to access the Padlet. You can scan the QR code, or you can access the Padlet this way, using the chat. Using the link that I'm dropping in the chat now for you. You definitely want to be able to access it now. It's not just resources for later, the actual activities that we're going to do today, because we're going to engage in 2 activities today. The links to access those activities are on the Padlet, okay? So you need to be able to access the Padlet along with the slide deck, right? So if anybody asks, how do I access today's PowerPoint? The answer to that question is going to be that it's on the Padlet. So you want to make sure that you're able to grab today's Padlet. Eric, if you don't mind copying that way you can drop it into the chat a couple more times for others in case people join us, because when they join later, you can't access the information that was in the chat previously. That would be super helpful for that. But I'm going to give everybody a moment to access the Padlet. You'll find the resources there. I am going to jump over there so that you can just understand what it is that you're looking at for those of you who haven't seen a Padlet before. So this is our Padlet for today's session. Like I said, we're going to be doing workshops. We're going to be doing activities today. And so the 2 activities we're going to be engaging in are right here on the left. So when we get to that point, you will access the links for those activities over here. I also have resources here because, again, it's only an hour session and we're not going to be able to really cover the content in depth. So I gave you resources for you to go learn a little bit more, because I almost always get people who ask me about the activities that we're going to do. So you can find that information here. And then, of course, as I said, the slide deck from today's presentation is also here. So you already have access to all of this content. Technically you could leave if you wanted to, but I hope that you don't, so you can engage and participate with us. But you have access to all of the resources that you need for today's workshop, okay? So we got 3 objectives. To talk about multiple modalities, discussing the significance of having multiple modalities, to focus on learner needs. We're going to look at 2 specific concrete strategies, right? So we're not even going to just be all abstract and theoretical. We're going to actually give 2 specific concrete strategy and hopefully have time to model those tasks. Thank you, Eric, for dropping that link in the chat box again. All right, so I have a video that I want to play here because we want to talk about the importance of variability. And I feel like the gentleman who gave this TED Talk describes it so much better than I could. So let's watch.
I want you to imagine just for a moment that we live in a world that believes in a different myth.
Let me make sure that I optimize my screen for video. I'm always scared that I didn't do it. So it was, okay, it was. I'll rewind it.
I'm gonna say, my notes are there. So at CAST, where I work, we pioneered a framework.
We can only see the presenter notes.
Thank you. As I was like, uh-oh, I picked the wrong screen. Let's try that again. I have 2 screens open. There we go. Share screen. I should have left it where it was because it was working, and then I went in and did things, and now it's not doing what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. Share screen, second screen. Optimize for video. Good. All right. Is that better? Can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes, you can see your PowerPoint. Yeah.
Got you.
I want you to imagine just for a moment that we live in a world that believes in a different myth, the myth of the average foot. And let's just call it a men's size 8.5. And I also want you to imagine that you were all asked to be here not because you're smart, but because you might have potential to be great sprinters. So just a simple question. If you want to think about how you might fare given your foot size in a world that was a size 8.5. It's obvious, right? Like the closer you are to that 8.5, the more likely it is you would be able to reach your full potential, whatever that is. But if you're size 13, you're in trouble. Actually, we'll just say you're bad at running, but that's a different conversation. The good news is we don't actually live in a world that believes this myth because we can see the variability. And because we can see it, we design for it. And when we design for it, we end up being able to recognize talent that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. Like Usain Bolt. If you don't know who he is, you will in the London Olympics. Fastest man in the world by far. And he's 6'5" and wears about a size 13. So the problem is, we do live in a world, I would argue, where most people believe in some version of the myth of the average learner, which is a little surprising if you think about it, that we can recognize that our feet vary, but we have a hard time extending that to things like how we learn, and even our brains for that matter. And as someone who spends time thinking about the brain, this one really is kind of funny to me. I mean, your brain has like billions of neurons interacting to form networks that interact with your environment and are constantly being shaped by your experience. Yet somehow, magically, out of that complexity, we think that our brains end up more or less the same. But the truth is, they're not. I mean, neuroscience is crystal clear on this point, that when it comes to the brain, just like when it comes to learning, variability is the rule, not the exception. Now, that variability is harder to see sometimes than it is with like foot size, but it's there, and it really matters.
Okay, so we're talking about the importance of variability here. And normally at this point, I pause to let you all do a little bit of interaction on thinking and reflecting on what he just said. But again, we only have an hour. So I wanted to just break this down a little bit and reinforce the concept. There's, as he called it, the average learner. There's also this concept called teaching to the middle. And this actually happens a lot in math, right? Because today is talking about unlocking the secret for multi-level math class. This happens a lot in the math class where we end up teaching to the middle. We teach for the average learner, right? We think about, our students, sometimes you have a little bit lower advanced students and more advanced students. And so a lot of times our instruction ends up like shooting right at the middle, whether it's intentional or not. As he said, sometimes we don't really think about this. Our understanding of variability doesn't necessarily extend to learning and the way the brain works, but it should, and it does. So I want us to think about a little bit about teaching to the middle and teaching for the average learner. So we're going to do a little interactive here, not as much as I would normally had to give us time to reflect and process. So we're going to do a little Menti. If you go, you can try two ways to access this. I would suggest the QR code if you have a second device. So you can scan the QR code and access the Mentimeter, or you can go to menti.com. So open another tab and go to menti.com and insert this code here. And this will get you to today's Mentimeter. And the first question that we're going to look at is about how it works for you when it comes to teaching to the middle, right? Going to give you a moment to reflect on your understanding about the average learner. I want to go over to the Mentimeter so we can actually see the question, but I want to give everybody a moment to try to access it. So scan the QR code or access the link. So here's the question. I see some people are already here. Here's the question. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase teach to the middle or teach the average learner? I'm going to stop sharing my screen because most of you are on it, but I'm gonna grab the link just in case those of you who weren't on it. And I'll drop it in the chat box for us. In case you weren't able to grab that.
Yeah, what's the number again on the Menti?
I'm gonna just drop the link in the chat box too.
Okay.
And then I'll put back up the screen. Either way, if when I share the screen, you'll be able to see the number on the top. And now my computer's acting up. Why is life so hard? It's acting up all morning. Okay, here's the number at the top. It's generating it again. But I see we're already starting to get in our word cloud here. I like the word cloud option because it just gives us a chance to really see like where the consistency is and the participation and what everybody's thinking. So what comes to mind when you hear the phrase teach to the middle or teach the average learner? I see a lot of people are voting for average, traditional classroom. Oh, thank you. I see someone took advantage of the fact that you can actually leave a comment on the Mentimeter. That's a new function of Mentimeter, and I really enjoy that one. That participants can actually leave a comment on the Mentimeter. Somebody dropped a comment on there saying we can't see your shared screen. So let's see. Average is the one in the middle. We got here. I see separate, Goldilocks. Ooh, that's a good one, right? Like the Goldilocks zone, understandable, frustration, old-fashioned, zone of proximal learning, accepted, normal, exclusion. Okay, I'm gonna move us on because he has a little bit more to tell us about the importance of variability. But I wanted to stop there to get us to think about teaching to the middle or teaching for the average learner. Because I can say, especially transparently, especially in the first 4 or 5 years that I was teaching math, whether I understood that I was doing this or not, I was very much doing this. I taught 3 different levels of math classes, and I very much taught to the middle. I taught to the average learner. I taught my math instruction at that point where I'm like, well, my higher level students, they're pretty much going to be good anyway. And my lower level students, I know that they need more time. That's kind of how I justified it. So it's okay if they have to take my class again, right? Or it's okay if they didn't really fully understand this content, because I'm kind of just like shooting right here in the middle. Everybody needs to know how to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. So, you know, there's whether it's intentional or not, sometimes we end up doing this. Let's see what else he has to say about the average learner.
This has to be one of the most frustratingly simple tasks ever devised, right? So most of us have tried it. Some of us may have completed it, but very few of us are what I would call an expert at it, which is, can you solve it in under 30 seconds? I know, right? So there are people that can do this, but what's more interesting than that is that when you look at that elite group, it turns out there are many different strategies that they can use to get them to expertise. For example, if you're good at being able to do pattern recognition really quickly, there is a specific strategy for you. And it's a different strategy than if you're one of those whiz kids that can memorize 50 algorithms in your head. But there's a strategy for you based on that too. The only strategy you don't want to use is the one I used as a little kid, which involves peeling stickers off, right? It turns out people totally know you cheated, and it takes way longer than 30 seconds. The trick is that basically if you wanted to be an expert at the Rubik's Cube, there are many strategies you could choose from. And the best strategy would depend on your particular variability. Now, I want to stay with the Rubik's Cube example, and I want to extend this to a different dimension of variability, not just strategy. But this is TV Raman, a colleague of mine. He's a computer programmer at Google, bright guy, and he's been blind since childhood. So we just think for a minute how we might design a learning environment where Raman could demonstrate his potential at a Rubik's Cube. So that's pretty straightforward. Before we could even think about differences in strategy, we'd have to think about the way the cube is represented to begin with. Color is an arbitrary choice, and it's not the only way that we could have represented the cube. So a simple answer would be just to change the representation. And people have done this. Here's a Braille Rubik's Cube. And if you're like me, the first thing I looked at, I said, wow, that is beautiful, right? And then I start thinking, but wait a minute, is that really good design? Why is it white? Now you have to, only if you can read Braille can you use that cube. If you don't read Braille, you're locked out of it. And now we're stuck building two cubes. So now we start to lose economy of scale. But it didn't have to be that way, right? We would have thought about variability up front. We could have designed a cube from the beginning with multiple representations.
All right.
And then
Yeah.
imagine if we actually, at the same time in that learning environment, explicitly taught the different strategies that could get you to expertise. Now we would be somewhere closer to supporting variability, somewhere closer to universal design for learning, and somewhere where we would be able to recognize talent that would have otherwise been overlooked, like TV Ramen. Turns out he's a man of many talents, including being an expert at the Rubik's Cube. 24 seconds.
We might see the Rixie.
It's kind of, it's amazing, actually.
Okay, so,
But the thing is, that's only possible through good design.
okay.
I mean, even though you
I would argue good
vaccinated,
design is only possible when we understand.
Yeah, you know, she's vaccinated too, but
There is the, I know there's the pinging. I'm trying to get it to stop. My computer was doing that all morning. I don't know why.
well,
The only way to get it to stop is for me to actually restart my computer at this point, and I'm in the middle of a workshop. But I hope everybody was able to at least get what he was saying there, right? It's about design, right? I agree with him when I saw the picture of the Rubik's Cube that now had Braille on it. Yes, okay, because you have someone who needs that specific kind. But as he said, that's actually a limitation in the design, because now when you design that, now people who need the color can't use that Rubik's Cube. And or maybe you have people who can see, but the Braille might actually help them solve the cube even better, right? So those of us who make, because we're going to talk about universal design for learning in a little bit, maybe those of us who like have a really good understanding of differentiated instruction, this is a good, clear example of it. Differentiated instruction would be, I made a separate Rubik's Cube that just had Braille on it because I knew I had a student who was visually impaired. That's differentiated instruction. Universal design for learning says, okay, let me think about the needs that some of my students have, as well as things that might be helpful for everyone, and design something accordingly. So a UDL'd Rubik's Cube might be one that has the stickers on it and the Braille on it, right? Differentiated instruction says, I make one for you. You need one that's small, so I make one that's small for you. You need one that's got Braille, so I make one that's Braille for you. That's differentiated instruction. That's difference. That's a clear difference between UDL and differentiated instruction. I hope that I was able to fix whatever the issue was on my computer. It's really frustrating that that's happening right now. But you know, technology, that's all we really can say. So we're gonna reflect a little bit more on the importance of variability and get into the universal design for learning, because that's, as we said, our secret to the multi-level class. The secret to the multi-level class is not teaching to the middle and being intentional with your design. Being intentional with your design and recognizing that there is variability, particularly with the way that people learn math. So we're going to go back to our Mentimeter in a moment. And we're going to actually look at some questions. So I'm putting this back up in case you didn't get it. So if you were already there, just go ahead and open that tab again for the Mentimeter. And I'm going to move us to the next question so that you can access the next question. And the next question is, which some of you are already really fast, reflect on your last math lesson. How, if at all, did your lesson address learning variability? So I don't even want you to go back to like 3 years ago. The last time you taught math, the lesson that you did, how, if at all, did your lesson address learner variability? We know that our students learn different ways. We know that their brains work in different ways. So take a moment to reflect, how did your lesson intentionally address the variability? And because if you were teaching online, the conversation we had earlier prior to today's session, that's also part of the variability. Access, who has laptops, who has phones, who has computers, who has access to a microphone being on, who has access to the computer. Those are also parts of variability when it comes to online instruction. So how did your lesson, if at all, address learner variability? I'll give you a moment to think on that, especially those of you who are typing on a phone. I know it's not as easy to type quickly. For those of you who don't teach math, about what you do teach. I mean, although this is a math specific training, for those of you who, whatever it is that you do teach, how do you address variability? Pictures, text, examples, student participation. The math lesson addressed learner variability by focusing on processes. I'll share my screen for those of you who are not on the Mentimeter in case you wanted to see what everybody was saying. Don't make the lesson too hard or too easy. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. If you wanted to type that, whoever types that in the chat box, what do you mean by don't make it too hard, too easy? My first instinct when I read that was, oh, teach to the middle, right? But maybe that's not what you meant, right? If you wanted to explain a little bit more, you can. I'd be interested in knowing that. Okay, use modeling, use visual languages, put up a problem, let them chat me the answers privately and wait till most answers have, so I'm not in a conversation with one skill student, right? Because that can get tough, right? When it seems like we're kind of just teaching with that one student because that's the student who's actually willing to participate and engage with us.
So,
All right, let's move on.
Cynthia, the person that had typed that was their response for what teaching to the middle meant.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, well, there you go. There you go. Thank you, Eric, for the clarification. Okay, so trying to make sure that I keep us on pace with our time because I want us to actually engage in some activities. So I've mentioned universal design for learning a few times, and I wanted to just make sure that all of us were on the same page about our understanding about universal design for learning. There are 3 principles for universal design for learning, and there are also a couple of methodologies around it. One thing that particularly sticks with my mind whenever I really want to focus on UDL is the idea of essential for some, but good for all. Right? Essential for some, but good for all, particularly when I'm teaching math. So a good example of that is like the ramps that we see, the ramps for wheelchairs. Those ramps were designed specifically for people who need wheelchairs, hence essential for some. However, those ramps are good for everyone because they're not just used by people who have wheelchairs. They're used by moms who have strollers. They're used by people who have bad knees. They're used by people who, like myself, sometimes we're lazy and we don't want to walk upstairs, right? Or they're used by skateboarders who they need somewhere to skateboard down. So that idea in mind is something that I keep in mind whenever I engage in these principles. I know I have some students who need to learn math a certain way, essential for some, but I design my lesson in such a way that it's good for everyone, right? And actually an example of that is I put in my notes for me to actually do this thing right here, which is for me to turn on my closed caption. This is just a simple thing that you can do, right? Those of us who are teaching online. Maybe I don't have people who are hearing impaired, but I might have students who do better seeing the words. It helps reinforce their understanding to not just hear me speak, but to also see what I'm saying. So right there, that simple thing you do, that's part of you using universal design for learning. It's some people need it, but it's good for everyone. And it's just as simple as turning it on, right? When you teach your math. So we've got 3 principles here. Universal design for learning says you use multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. Now, I could tell you what each one of these mean, but I want to give you a second to activate your prior knowledge a little bit. So we're going to go back over to our Mentimeter. I'm going to move you forward to the next question. That's going to give you a chance to think about what you think each one of these means. Multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. I did kind of touch on them a little bit yesterday. So some of you probably already know the answers, but that's okay. So we're going to go back over to the Mentimeter. So I'll open that tab if you have it open already. And here's the first question. The principle of representation calls for instruction and materials to provide options for. And if you're looking on your screen, you'll see it'll actually tell you options for what. If I can get it to pull up. Options say options for perception, options for language and mathematical expressions and symbols, options for comprehension. So which question do you think the principle of multiple means of representation addresses? Do you think it addresses the how, the why, or the what? Which question do you think the principle of multiple means of representation addresses? Because each one of these is going to tell you about lesson design. So representation, is it the what, is it the why, or is it the how? See, I got a lot of people voting for the how. We got about 18, 19 people voted now. I'll give about 10 more seconds. Oh, we finally got someone in for the why. All right. So representation is about my content, right? We're talking about math. The math content that I am delivering, how I deliver it, the multiple ways of engaging with it that I deliver it. So the question that it answers is the what. What am I teaching? It's the what, okay? It's making sure that I deliver my content with varying modalities. So for example, even the way that I'm giving the workshop right now I'm really heavily relying on visual modality and a little bit of auditory. But when I turned on the closed caption, that was me actually making sure that I engage in varying modalities of the representation, the way that I was giving the content. So think about when you give your content, how you design your content. A really good example for this for me is a lot of times when I give a workshop, an activity or a task, a lot of times, especially when we first started teaching online, my instructions were pretty much verbal. I'm telling you what I want you to do. Okay, guys, we're going to go to breakout rooms and we're going to do this, this, and this. And then maybe I realized that not everybody understood or heard what I said. So then maybe I started typing the directions on my Google slide. Or maybe I even typed the directions on a handout that I sent to everybody. But that's still only one way of engaging. So now what I started doing is pretty much anytime I have an activity or a task, I try to be intentional about how I give them that information. Yes, I type the instructions for those of them who need to read it, but I also leave an audio clip of me saying the instructions because we know what happens. They go to the breakout room and the first thing that happens is what they say, what she said we're supposed to do. And yes, I type the instructions, but not everybody reads and not everybody takes in the information by reading. Some people really need to hear it. So just that little change as far as me being intentional about representation. Now, when I give a math task, I make sure that the instructions are given through text by, I've typed the instructions, but a lot of times I also include an audio recording of me saying the instructions. Sometimes I even include a video recording of me giving the instructions. That is an example of multiple means of representation. Okay, so next question, because I want to make sure that we're our time here. Next question. The principle of action and expression that calls for instruction and materials to provide options for access and response, expression and communication, and executive functions. So which question do you think the principle of multiple means of action and expression addresses? Do you think that addresses the what, the why, or the how? That's interesting. Like, so everybody recognizes that the representation was the what. So nobody voted for the what. Okay, so we got about 17 people who voted. Action and expression is the how, right? It's how the students engage with my content. So I also need to think about having multiple modalities, varying modalities for how the students can engage with my content. Meaning my math content can't all just be type your answers in the chat box to me. My math content can't all just be do it on a worksheet and take a picture of it and send it to me. Or if I'm in person, my task can't all just be a worksheet, right? I have to make sure that I vary the modalities for how the students engage with my content, giving them multiple ways to show that they understand. If I limit it to just one way of them showing their understanding, I'm basically being like the person who designs the 8.5 size shoes, and I'm missing Usain Bolt's potential because he wears a size 13. By saying that you can only show me your understanding of my math content this one way, I'm creating barriers for my students. And obviously the next question would be the why. Engagement is the why. So you can vote for this one if you want to, but you don't have to. But the principle of engagement calls for instruction and materials to provide options for recruiting learner interests, sustaining learner effort and persistence, and self-regulation. So this is the why. And this one I think is the most important because, again, that word engagement, especially with math. When am I ever going to use this? Why do I have to learn this? Giving them multiple modalities that will recruit their interests. Why should I want to do your math task? Why should I want to engage in this? So thinking about being intentional that you're trying to give multiple modalities that allows for them self-regulation. A strong part of that is helping students to develop their own understanding rather than you giving them the understanding, right? So this one would be the why. I did see 8 people took the time to vote. I appreciate those 8 of you who took the time to vote, but this one would be the why. So I'm going to exit out of this and go back to our slide because now we're going to really get into the strategies, right? So we had the multiple means, the UDL principles, and that is basically the secret to unlocking the multi-level math class. You know you have a heterogeneous math class. So what you want to do is make sure that you're not teaching to the middle, that you're addressing variability. And the way that you can go about addressing variability is in how you design your instruction, how you give your content, how you allow students to engage with your content, and how you help keep them motivated in learning whatever it is your content is, whether you're teaching math, ESL, literacy, social studies, whatever it is that you're teaching. So that's kind of like a crash course in UDL. But now let's look at our concrete strategies. I did say we'd give strategies here. So prepare our strategy, addressing learner needs. I have 2 strategies. There's about 4 or 5 actually that I really use, but again, we only had an hour, so I had to like pick what are the 2 that I really want to give everybody. Because Cynthia, okay, I get what you're saying in theory, but give me something I can actually use in class tomorrow that does those things. So one of the first strategies is using what's called a low floor and a high ceiling. When you engage in tasks that do this, you're automatically going to stop teaching to the middle. Because low floor, high ceiling says I create that entire bell curve. For my students who need a little bit more support, they still can access it. And for my students who, you know, I already know this already, I already get this already, there's room for them to still be challenged and to deepen their understanding. Hence low floor, high ceiling. And I got a little bit of research, obviously, because I'm all about evidence-based here, to show you what this means a little bit. This came from Dr. Jo Boaler out of Stanford University. She's the one who kind of really started championing the low floor, high ceiling, and she just tells us, here's exactly what it is. It's a task, it's a mathematical activity that everyone in the group, no matter what their level is, can begin to work on. They can engage in because there's a low floor. I have accessibility. And those tasks present possibilities for the participants to do much more challenging math. So high ceiling. So low floor, high ceiling. And one of my favorite instructional routines that is a low floor and high ceiling is called the slow reveal graph. Okay, so this is where we're going to need to jump over to your Padlet So Eric, if you want to drop the Padlet link in the chat box one more time, I'd appreciate it. But here's where you want to jump over to your Padlet. Okay, so our Padlet looks like this. Here's our first activity. See here on the left-hand side where it says links for activities for a workshop. This is Desmos. It is a really powerful math tool. It's a completely free math tool. And we're going to do what's called a slow reveal graph activity or task. When you try to log on, it might tell you you should sign in. You do not have to sign in, okay? So just click on the link there, and that will take you to Desmos, okay? It will take you over to Desmos for us to do our slow reveal graph activity. So Desmos and the slow reveal graph, if those of you who don't want to click on it from the Padlet, maybe you didn't get on the Padlet, I will go ahead and drop the link for the Desmos activity in the chat box just to get us all over there. Okay, so you got multiple options. You can access the Desmos from the Padlet, or you can click on the link in the chat box. As you can see here, you go to student.desmos.com and here's your access code. Again, multiple modalities, right? I gave you 3 different ways to get to my content. And take your shot at it, right? I'm gonna give us about 5 minutes, 6 minutes. The slow reveal graph, you're actually getting a chance to engage in it. This is what it would look like if you were to do this activity with your students. And then I'll show you what it looks like on the teacher end, because this is the reason why I love this tool. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why I love this tool, but the teacher end of this tool is why I'm gonna use this, whether I teach online or in person. All right, I see we got about 31 people in already, which is pretty good. I won't complain. And I left it open for you all. So I see some people are like jumping around, which is fine. But I'm actually gonna just go ahead and show you one of the best features of this tool. What just happened to those of you who are on Desmos? You can unmute yourself, or you can tell them, you can type it in the chat box. What just happened?
Got paused.
Got paused, right?
Got paused.
I love
Activity
that,
paused.
right? How many of us have
That's
been in
nice,
the math
John.
class and our students are super engaged in something? We know we need them to stop because everybody is struggling with something, or we want to advance them forward and they're not really paying attention, even though you ask them repeatedly, can I have your attention? I love the pause feature. I'm like, listen, everybody's no longer working, right? Also, so I'll unpause it. I'll let you go back. But take a moment and let's look at the slow reveal. I know I saw a lot of people jump ahead, but I would encourage you to actually try to go through it a little bit.
Cynthia, do you want us in, you're not sharing your screen right now. Is that what you
Oh,
want?
no, because all of you all are in Desmos anyway. I'm looking on the teacher side, so
Okay.
there's no point in me sharing my screen because everybody's over on Desmos
Okay.
anyway. Someone started sharing the screen, Eric. I don't know if they are aware of
Yeah,
that. You know,
so
your computer is now being shared to everybody and recorded.
yeah, so don't share your screen. Seems undemocratic, right? But don't share your screen.
Yes, in a moment, Victoria, I will share what the teacher's seeing, but I did want to give us a chance about the slow reveal graph, right? For us to see, I want to break down this activity. Why is this a low floor, high ceiling kind of task? Okay, so for time's sake though, let's talk about the slow reveal graph first. Low floor, high ceiling. If you notice the very first slide just says, what do you notice? That's accessible, right? I don't go straight to tell me what the data is, answer how many blah, 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 blah. And the reason why I love slow reveal graphs as an instructional routine for teaching math is it forces the learners to actually have to stop to think about every piece of data and everything that's being shown, right? You're starting to think about what it is that you're seeing, why it is that you're seeing that. And I like the way that set out with it, because what always happens is people try and guess what they think the data is about. And as you get more and more data, that's when you go, oh. And then by the time you get to the 7th or 8th slide, the students start giving really rich questions like, well, how many people did they survey? Where was this survey taken? That's going to determine what I know about the percentages, et cetera, right? Now that I know what the numbers are about, what story is it trying to tell? That's what we want people to do when they look at data. And the slow reveal graph works whether you teach math, because we know charts, tables, and graphs are in math, science, history. So that's like 3/5 of the table of the test, right? Of the GED of the task. So if you're teaching charts, tables, if you're teaching graphs or data analysis of any kind, I would definitely recommend using the instructional routine of the slow reveal graph, right? Giving students a small piece at each point, which really focuses them on thinking about the data that is there, right? So let's talk about Desmos for a second. I did give you all free reign as far as how you were moving through it, but if I was actually running this in the class, I would have paced you. There's actually an option called pacing, right? Where I literally can say, you cannot move past slides 1 and 2, because I really want to make sure that you only focus on slides 1 and 2. So I have the option to pace, say, okay, let's look at slides 1 and 2. And so the students would only be able to see, those of you who obviously you started before I paced it, but if I paced it when we started, students will only be able to look at slides 1 and 2. Now I'm really going to get them to focus on the data, on what's there, because we know a lot of times the students make mistakes because they make assumptions about the data. They say things about the data that's not actually really there, right? I can't say that this is about the election because I don't know that. I have to really think about what these bars mean, what these percentages mean, et cetera. So I can pace my students. This is one of the things I love about Desmos. What you're seeing now is my teacher dashboard. Also, one of the things that I really like about this tool is immediately, right, when I jumped over here, I knew exactly how many people were on. I have 50 students on. I can anonymize it, which means now if I'm sharing my screen and my students see it, their names are not being called out. When I anonymize it, it turns everybody's name into like a famous mathematician. But for me as the teacher, all I have to do is hover over it and I know exactly what student that is. So now my students have the ability for me to share their work as a class in a way that's not threatening, right? You all got to experience what it's like as a student. Students can access Desmos activities on phones, on mobile devices, on laptops. As a teacher, I can access ready-made Desmos activities, meaning like there's actually things that were already done and lessons that were already made, or I can make them myself. I personally, Cynthia Bell, I actually made this slow reveal graph activity because I like using slow reveal graph as an instructional routine, but I wanted to use it in Desmos. So I took that routine because this used to be a Google Slides thing. I had it in Google Slides and I would have my students go through it in Google Slides. But I realized that Desmos was a better tool because of these functions here, that I can paste them, that I can put them in groups, that I can look at their responses. Here's what I could see what the students are doing. If I clicked on this student here, I could see what they were doing. If I looked here, I can see an overview of all of the students' responses. Okay, so right there, I know my students are recognizing that this is about percentages. Or right there, I see that most people are not really understanding this idea or this concept. So I'm going to pause everybody, bring them back, and let's talk about this. There's another feature that I really like, which is the ability to leave feedback, right? Especially if I'm teaching online. We know if we were in person, I'd have a student raise their hand, I'd come over to them, and they'd say, Ms. Bell, this is what I'm doing. I don't really understand. And then you give them immediate feedback. Sometimes when we're teaching online, we don't have the ability to do that. But when I'm using Desmos in this regard, it allows me to actually give that feedback. This student, Gladys West, I clicked on their work. I realized this is what they typed. I have two options. I can push them. Remember, low floor, high ceiling. I push them. Tell me more. What do you mean by ladder? Or I can support them. I like push and support. I can support them. Okay, I see you're a little stuck here. Or I see you're going in a different direction here. What do you mean by this? How would that work if you looked at it like that? And the way I would go about doing that is clicking here, and that allows me to type to them, hello, how are you? And whoever that student is, you just got a message from me. Whichever student that was, you just got a message from me. So that's immediate feedback right there to be able to do. Now, this workshop is not about Desmos. This workshop is about how to address multi-level learners, but Desmos is a really good tool for me to do that, because this one allows multiple means of engagement. Action and expression. I've got different ways for my students to respond depending on how I design the activity. Yes, right now the activity is designed for you to only respond with text, but depending on how I design the activity, students can respond in different ways, as well as multiple means of representation. I have a lot of Desmos activities that I've designed that have video, that have pictures, that have recordings of audio. Desmos allows me to have multiple means of representation and multiple means of action and expression for me to teach math. I also use it as a means of formative assessment, right? So the activity that I design doesn't just have to be about math. Sometimes I'll have like a couple of slides that says, how are you feeling today? And the students would go in and drag like a little arrow on a scale. I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. Or how do you feel about what you learned today? Kind of like an exit ticket. And the students would drag and drop the image to how they're feeling about how they learned today. Desmos allows me that flexibility for multiple means of action and expression, which is why I use Desmos. And the last thing about it is snapshots. I really like the option of snapshots, meaning, so when I was over here, if you saw these pictures here, if we were in the classroom and I wanted to lead a whole group discussion, I walked around, I saw how students were responding, and I'd say, I really like what you did here. When we have our whole group discussion, do you mind sharing with the class your answer? Do you mind sharing with the class how you got that, right? Can we talk about that? And I'd select, you. All right, I want you to share with the class, or can I take your work and share it with the class? The equivalent of that for me using this tool is the snapshots. So I'm looking here, I like what this person said, so I'm gonna grab it. I like what this person said, so I'm gonna grab it. And I like what this person said, so I'm gonna grab it. Now I go over to snapshots and I say, well, you know what? I want this person to go first, and then I want this person to go second, and then I want to talk about this one. And then I present it. I say, okay, class, notice how the name disappears too. All right, class, let's look at this answer here. What do we think about this? Why do we think that? Let's go into breakout rooms and small groups and talk about this, etc. So those are just a couple of functions. I'll stick around at the end if anybody has any questions about Desmos, because again, this wasn't a Desmos workshop, but I did see it as an opportunity to introduce this really valuable tool to those of us who were not familiar with it, because it works really well with the strategy of low floor, high ceiling. The slow reveal graph works no matter what level your students are, hence multi-level classroom. It's low floor, high ceiling. There's always room to push people, but there's accessibility in there. You can also do this with math problems, right? You have a word problem, slow reveal it. Don't give all the information at one time, especially the question. I love to take the question off, take the numbers out, have the students to actually focus on what the words are, what it is that they need, what is it that they have, before they just jump to, oh, numbers, do things with numbers, right? So you could take this idea of the slow reveal and use it for things other than graphs. But the slow reveal process as an instructional routine fits really well with the strategy of low floor, because it's about accessibility, and high ceiling, room for growth. When you engage in the strategy, you're getting away from that teach to the middle. You're getting open to variability. All right, so for time's sake, I'm gonna move us to the last strategy, because we only got 6 minutes left, but the last strategy is a short one. Here's our second strategy: promote reasoning and thinking over answer getting. And I did cite the source here again from Dr. Joe Bowler, because I think that this is one of the things that's hardest for those of us who teach math. We feel like we have to help the students. We have to tell them because the students really only want to get the answer because they have to take the test. But if you really want to engage in teaching a multi-level math class in an effective way, this is a strategy for you. Teach reasoning and thinking over answer getting. And here's why you should do it. Here's some data. This is from a report done. It's just a clip from a report. Basically says that students, despite the students' lack of familiarity, so this is about testing, right? This is about to take a test. Despite the students' lack of familiarity with examination questions or working under time conditions of any kind, those students scored at significantly higher levels than a matched cohort of students who spent 3 years working through questions similar to the national exam. So basically what they're saying is students who test prepped on how to get answers did not do as well as the group of students who were taught about reasoning and thinking. The students did so well in the standardized national exam because they've been taught to believe in their own capabilities. They've been given helpful diagnostic information on their learning, so that's about engagement, and they had learned that they could solve any question as they were mathematical problem solvers. So what you do when you teach students to think and reason over answer getting is you empower them. You build their confidence. You make them into math problem solvers, so then it doesn't matter what kind of test they're taking. Versus prepping them for the test, teaching them what kinds of questions they'll see on the test, teaching them how to get the answers to the test, how to get the answers to the questions. The data shows that students who are actually taught how to think, they feel a lot more confident and they're a lot more successful no matter what the test is. So here's an instruction routine to go about doing that. Here's one thing that you could do to help students reason and think over answer getting. It's called Which One Doesn't Belong. Some of you probably have done this one already. This is actually one of my favorite instructional routines. So if you jump over to our Padlet again, you'll see the Which One Doesn't Belong activity. This one is really short, so it's okay if we run out of that we're at the end because it doesn't take that much time to do it. So if you hop over to our Which One Doesn't Belong activity on the Padlet, you'll see it. I'm actually going to drop that link in the chat just to make it easier for those of you who want to access it that way. Which One Doesn't Belong is basically an activity that helps you to focus students' thinking on reasoning over answer getting. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat if I can pull it up so that you can access it. But you already have access to it too. It's on the Padlet. For those of you who are using the Padlet, you see it here. It says access the Which One Doesn't Belong task. So you can grab it from here or you can grab it from the chat box, whichever one makes you feel most comfortable. And I designed this Which One Doesn't Belong in Padlet. So all you're asking the students to do, as you can see, the instructions are here. Click the plus sign below the image that you choose to create a new post to respond. So you would actually click the plus sign underneath whatever image it is, but you don't just say, oh, well, it's this one. You have to tell me why you think that one, why you think that image that you're choosing doesn't belong. So this is how the students would engage in this activity. You click the plus sign, type your answer, and tell me why you think that one doesn't belong. And the beauty of Which One Doesn't Belong is there is no right answer, right? Because we're not focusing on answer getting, we're focusing on reasoning and sense making. Okay. So hopefully you were able to access it. I don't see anybody adding anything yet, but links close a few minutes after the, oh, okay, that's Eric. He's leaving a message. You can do Which One Doesn't Belong in Padlet. You can also do Which One Doesn't Belong on a Jamboard. But the point of Which One Doesn't Belong is that you're engaging students and the opportunity to think without having to worry about what's the right answer. And now they're having to express themselves. Why I chose this answer? Why is it this one? And Padlet, multiple means of action and expression. If you see here, when you click that, students actually have different ways that they can respond. They can record a video response. They can record an audio response. They can even draw their response, like, like using their fingers on their screens and actually write their response. They can use GIFs, they can use images. Padlet allows for multiple means of action and expression. It allows for them to be able to demonstrate their understanding in varied modalities. So which one doesn't belong is our last instructional routine that I was going to share with you. I shared two, and each one of these instructional routines goes with our strategy. WODB works really well for the strategy of promote reasoning and thinking over answer getting. And the slow reveal graph, that's an instructional routine that works really well with the strategy of low floor, high ceiling tasks.
So Cynthia, I think is it Mark Truszowski who he likes to tweet which one doesn't
Yes, he does.
belong,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So if you all like this activity on Twitter, a colleague of ours, Mark Truszowski, often will give photos of which one doesn't belong type activities to share and to model.
And I did remember I said at the beginning on the Padlet, this is why all of you hopefully get it. I actually dropped resources for the two instructional routines, right? Maybe you really like the slow reveal graph, but you don't have time to make them. Go here. This is the website for slow reveal graphs. They have lots of them already there. And it's up to you to take it and use it for how you want to use it. Remember, I said it was a Google slide, but I put it in Desmos. The same thing with which one does it belong. This is the website, WODB. So lots of different ideas and activities are ready for WODB. So you don't actually have to build them yourself. I built this in Padlet because I wanted to use Padlet, but these specific numbers, this specific activity, I actually did get from the website WODB. So we are out of time. Here is my email information. I hope this gave you some things to think about as far as how to go about teaching the multi-level math class, whether you're teaching online or hybrid. Think about being intentional with how you design your instruction, how you design your content, how you allow parts of your students to engage with your content. That's our UDL principles. And then try these two strategies of using low floor, high ceiling tasks and promoting reasoning and thinking over answer getting. And I appreciate you all's time. I hope this was helpful. I will stick around for a couple questions, although I think Eric said the link's closed. So I don't know how
No,
to.
that's something else. That's the link for the professional development certificate. So there was a question from Laura, Cynthia, about like, do you think Desmos is going to stay free for the foreseeable future, or is it going to be one of these bait and switch kind of things?
Good question. Yes, because Desmos is actually a tool that's been around for years. I feel like I'm a missionary for Desmos because the K through 12 world has been using Desmos for years. And I just kept shouting to the rooftops, why isn't adult ed using this amazing tool? And then COVID happened. And then people were forced to teach online. And that's when I saw my opportunity. I'm like, use Desmos. But Desmos actually works really well in the classroom because students can engage with it on their phones. And all you have to do is share it on your screen, right? And it is completely free. It's also got a scientific calculator built in. It's got a graphing calculator built in. So those of us who are teaching functions, you want the students to actually see what the function looks like, what actually happens when you put the equation in, what actually happens when you have a systems of equation. Use the graphing calculator on Desmos with the students so they can actually see what's happening with the lines when I change the slope, etc. All of that is free. So yes, I think it's going to stay free. It's amazingly incredible tool. You can learn more about it if you go to learn.desmos.com. They're just like 3 websites you want to know. Student.desmos.com is where the students go. Learn.desmos.com is where you go to learn how to use Desmos. And then you need a teacher account. And yes, the teacher account is free. And that's teacher.desmos.com. So where I was when you all were seeing my teacher side, I was on teacher.desmos. But where you all were, you were on student.desmos.com.
And Aggie also gave in the chat, Aggie gave out a shout out to GeoGebra.
Yes, GeoGebra is a great tool too. I do find it a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I want to say arduous.
It's quirky.
I find it hard to use sometimes.
Yeah, it's quirky. It's quirky. Yeah, but and I also found some bugs in there, but that's okay. The wonderful thing about GeoGebra is like it can do all those complex geometry problems that I have a hard time to do in Desmos. So if you can get over that hurdle of it's quirky then you get to access all of those really complex things.
True. And one thing to keep in mind for those of you who teach lower level math, Desmos was originally designed for the high school level. So there's a lot of like high level math stuff on there, but there are things that you can find that are lower level. They did just actually release the 6 through 8 curriculum. So there's a lot of 6 through 8 math stuff on there. But again, you can always make your own, right? You can access things that are already made, or you can make your own. I think I'm done, but are there any other questions or
I
comments?
have a
'Cause
quick
still
question,
haven't-
if that's
Go ahead.
okay. Yeah.
Yes.
How long did it take for you to create one of those lessons?
Which one? Like which one doesn't which
The
one doesn't-
reveal one.
Oh, the slow reveal. That one actually didn't take that long because, as I said, I already had it in Google Slides, right? Like I could even show you I had that lesson in the Google Slides, but I needed to move it to Desmos. So I'd say probably for me about 20 minutes because it was literally me transferring it over. But I didn't make that from scratch, right? Like I went on the slow reveal graph website. I got this lesson. I'm like, I like this content. I want to use it for this particular lesson. And you're allowed to, right? They have those rights there for teachers to use it. And I took it from there and I transferred it over to Google Slides. And I used it for a while in Google Slides and the students engaged with it well, but then it had some limitations. I'm like, I want students to be more this, and I want to be able to see everyone. With Google Slides, I wasn't able to see everyone. Desmos, I'm able to see everybody. So then that's when I transferred it over to Desmos. But maybe if you're asking in general, how long does it take to build a Desmos activity? It really depends on the activity. Because the 3-act math test, I don't know if you all have heard that instructional routine, the 3-act math test, a lot of times that uses videos. I've also built that in Desmos. Those take me longer because I have to upload the videos. I have to upload the images. I have to put everything in there. So it depends on the task that you're designing as to how long it takes. Good question. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
All right.
And feel free to modify, right? So if you're thinking about looking into it a little bit more, try searching for a lesson, right? Like that's what I take the teachers through. What is it that you're about to teach tomorrow, right? Like I just did a coaching session last week with a teacher on Desmos. He said, I'm about to start teaching unit rates. I'm like, great. So let's go to Desmos, type in unit rates. And then all the lessons that are about unit rate popped up and we went through them and we looked at which ones were like would cover what it was that he wanted to cover. He found one that was kind of good, but not good. You do have the ability to edit, right? You can say, I like this thing, and you can tell it, copy this thing. Now that it's copied, it's yours. And now you can go in and edit it. You're like, I don't like this slide, get rid of this one. I don't like how they ask this question. You can edit the activities that you find as well. So you don't have to build everything from scratch. Any other questions? What is the other app for complex geometry problems? That was GeoGebra. I'll type that in the chat box. I'm going to spell it wrong. GeoGebra.
Yeah,
It's like
Aggie just
algebra and geography, like GeoGebra.
Aggie just put it in.
Thank you. She spelled it better than me. Oh, I spelled it right. Yay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Any other questions? Because I respect everybody's time. So
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Cynthia, so much. I think this is a lot of both sort of information about teaching priorities, but then also concrete strategies for how to enact those priorities. So
Could I just ask, please, how do you spell the slow reveal graph?
I think Cynthia's typing.
yes, sorry. I sent it to a private message. I'll do that one
Okay.
more time. Also, slow reveal graph. Also, access it. Be sure to access it in the on the Padlet. The actual website, I gave it to everyone on the Padlet. So there you are. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Cynthia, for a really great session. Thanks for everybody for presenting, sharing your ideas and doing the interactivity. And hopefully this was a good session for you all. And then we'll see you in other workshops over the course of the next couple of days.